In Activity 5, Water Animals, Snails, students add pond snails to their aquariums and discuss the role of these animals in an underwater ecosystem. You will need the following materials from the kit: Activity Sheet 2, Activity Sheet 5, aquariums from Activity 4, plastic dishes, magnifiers, and pond snails. You will also need to provide brown, beige, gray, and black crayons, white paper, paper towels, assorted shells, and spring water. To prepare for this activity, make a copy of Activity Sheet 5 for each student. Each student will also need his or her copy of Activity Sheet 2. Collect a variety of shells for students to examine at the start of this activity. Place the holding tanks of snails at a distribution station and place a jug of spring water and some paper towels next to the tanks. Each team of 4 will need their aquarium, 2 plastic dishes, 2 magnifiers, 2 sheets of white paper, and some crayons. To begin this activity, have students observe and compare the shells you collected. Ask students, what are these objects and where did they come from? Students should recognize most of them as shells. Shells come from water animals such as clams, mussels, crabs, and lobsters. Then ask, what is a shell for? A shell is a hard covering that protects the plant or animal inside. Draw a picture of a snail similar to Figure 5.2 and ask students, what is this a picture of? Students should recognize it as a snail. Help students locate and identify the foot, tentacles, mouth, and eyes. Next, ask students, where do snails live? Students may know that snails live in damp, cool soil under logs, rocks, and wet leaves. Explain that pond snails live in freshwater lakes and streams, and tell students that they are going to examine a pond snail up close. Divide the class into teams of 4 and distribute the materials. Also, give a copy of Activity Sheet 5 and return Activity Sheet 2 to each student. Have students pour about an inch of spring water into each dish. Then, retrieve 2 large snails from the holding tanks and place one in each dish of water. Tell students to return to their work areas and place the dishes on a sheet of white paper. Ask students, how did the snails feel when you picked them up? The first thing students may notice is the snail's hard shell. Some students may also have noticed that their snail stuck to the side of the tank and had to be gently pried loose. Have the students examine the snails in their dish of water, with and without a magnifier. Ask students, how do your snails move? Students should observe snails move by extending their foot and pulling themselves along. Next, ask students, what do the snail's tentacles look like? Tentacles are long, thin, hair-like appendages that stick out from the snail's head. The snail waves them around. Explain that the tentacles help a snail tell where it is and what's around it, much like the feelers on a bug, and that the snail's eyes are at the base of the tentacles. Ask students to examine the underside of the snail. This can best be done when a large snail is attached to the side of the dish. Ask students, do you see the hole that opens and closes? What do you think this hole is for? Confirm that this hole is the snail's mouth. Tell students that a snail's teeth are on its tongue, and that the snail uses its tongue to shred food into tiny bits. Then ask, what do you think a snail eats? Explain that snails eat algae, as well as decaying plants and animals. Have the students color in the diagrams of a pond snail on Activity Sheet 5 and label the parts. Next, as a class, compare and contrast pond snails with snails they have seen on land. For example, land snails have shells just like pond snails. They move about in a foot, they have tentacles, and they eat plants and decaying plant and animal matter. Land snails live on land, pond snails live in water. Students may be interested to know that most land snails have 2 sets of tentacles, while pond snails only have 1 set. Ask students, what do you think pond snails need to survive? Students may say that pond snails need food, water, and oxygen, just like land animals. Next, have the teams retrieve their aquariums and gently place the snails into them. Ask them to observe the snails as they get acquainted with their new home. When students have finished, ask them to add the snails to their drawings on Activity Sheet 2. Finally, ask students, Why do you think snails are good animals to have in an underwater ecosystem such as an aquarium? Snails keep the walls of the aquarium clean by eating the algae that grow there. They also eat the leftover food, decaying plants, and dead platies. In the wild, snails do all of this, plus provide food for birds, larger fish, and some water animals. When they die, their bodies decay and provide food to smaller organisms. To conclude this activity, have students return the aquariums to their storage place. Discard the water in the plastic dishes. Rinse and dry the dishes and return them, along with the magnifiers, to the kit. Store the unused spring water for future use. Collect the sheets of white paper and activity sheet 2. For science background, reinforcement activities, curriculum connections, and information about the Delta Science Reader, please consult your DSM Teacher's Guide.